Pleasure to meet all at last, and welcome once again to HJN Season 5. For this piece of HJN, and all the pet animals I've been talking about, with 2 more to go, we got snakes for our next piece. Yeah, it seems that reptiles are going to be a bit of a subject in their own right. So, we'll essentially just go on ahead and talk a bit about the snakes. Like all the other animals I've listed, there's a lot of things to talk about regarding snakes. A lot of the basic factors, including a good habitat for them to be kept in, if you're hoping to keep good captivity in account with the ownership of a snake. You got food, you got water, you got a number of factors in order to keep them comfortable in their habitat, to prevent them from breaking out. But sometimes, let's just say that with all that's happened on the internet, for instance, sometimes there's a tendency where the snakes or boas or pythons or adders even, because some instances of people actually having venomous snakes like cobras and rattlers, they're known to exist. And it's insane that people can actually keep such dangerous snakes out there in captivity. I mean, the ferdinands, the coral snake, and the freaking Mozambique cobra. I mean, you gotta be serious about this sort of stuff. Just know the fact that such venomous snakes have such high potency in their venom that they could kill dozens of people with one single drop of that stuff. And a lot of times a snake will inject more than just a single drop's worth into one's body. And we know that there's a lot of things that go around when it comes to venom intoxication because of a snake bite. And even if a snake is not venomous and it doesn't kill you based on one bite alone, sometimes the bites are pretty horrifying. And I will go ahead and say that much like when I once had a job at elementary school in which I would take care of a class pet known as Roxanne the rat, there was a similar case in which that I had control over a garter snake named Freddy. Yeah, this was long before the Fazbear came along, but just like with Roxanne the rat, I also had to maintain responsibility based on ensuring that Roxanne and Freddy were all kept in order. Now that I mention it, I did mention that Freddy, the garter snake, was a thing in my life long before the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise came around, and there was someone else, Roxanne Rat? Kind of a weird coincidence that the names Freddy and Roxanne would also make appearances in Five Nights at Freddy's, even though both of them came out many years apart, and on top of that, the Roxanne thing was kind of more of a recent turnaround in my life. I was obsessed with the name as much as I was obsessed with the character, but again, I feel like that's interesting to point out. Freddy and Roxanne, both were pet animal names that I got to know over the years, and now they're both character names in FNAF? Well, that's a pretty strange coincidence that I just formulated here, but just felt like pointing it out. Anyways, though, with 2 different pets that I was kept responsible of all the time, especially many times after school, in which that I would have to show up to the pet room, in which case that they had a lot of pets around there. They didn't just have a snake or a rat, they also had a few birds, a tank full of some fish, and I kid you not, an iguana was there as well. And she was huge. But my responsibilities were mainly focused on the likes of Roxanne the rat and Freddy the snake. So what I did was, much like when I had to feed Roxanne and Freddy, with the likes of Roxanne, she usually gets a lot of her staples. Some kibbled bits here and there that were handcrafted by the lunch lady, specifically formulated for rats. And as for Freddy, he of course would have a hold of some earthworms, as well as crickets, which he would munch on every now and then. The crickets were pretty easy to handle because all I had to do was drop them in there, but the earthworms, for some reason I was told that Freddy liked to have them hang from our fingertips so that he could strike out and grab it. I don't know how, but I swear, almost every single time that he would bite on the earthworm, he would get so close to biting my own fingers. And he was not a venomous snake. That's at least the good thing to know about, because it was kind of terrifying for me getting to know about the venomous species and wondering, is somebody actually going to get a hold of a venomous snake and, despite defanging them or removing the poison sacs from their bodies, are they still going to pose a threat by any means? Well, anyways, all I have to say about all this stuff is, well, there's a lot of snake varieties, a lot of colors, shapes, and sizes, venomous, non-venomous, which, for the most part, one of the major ways that you can identify and distinguish between a venomous and non-venomous snake is by looking in their eyes. They'll oftentimes have cat-like pupils to let you know that they're venomous. Often if they're rounded like our own, then it's typically a non-venomous species. And there's even more cases that develop between the somewhat difficult way to distinguish between different species of venomous and non-venomous snakes. Sometimes they can actually blend by having their own color palettes changed to fit the description of that of venomous snakes. For instance, there's a snake that actually has an underbelly that matches up with the coral snake. And we know the coral snake is one of the most dangerous snakes in the southwestern United States. But there is a couple species of snakes out there that sort of mimic the color scheme of the coral snake itself. And there's even that well-known ditty called, "If red touches yellow, it can kill a fellow." I learned that a long time ago in the channel known as Howcast, which also explains how to deal with a snake bite, which was pretty hilarious to see the guys just doing such a terrible job at it. But those were actors, and they got paid pretty good money, it seems, because they put on a hell of a show. Anyways, though, I've said a lot about snakes. My own experiences alone were pretty incredible. And I will say that the many times that I've encountered snakes, whether it be in the wild or in captivity in various places, some museums, some wildlife habitations, and even a few zoos here and there. But still, I'm quite the big lover of most of these sort of things. I especially can't be sure if I'm going to have a snake of my own. But if there's really one big story that I might as well explain, it'd be the fact that when I revisited my old apartments in West Bend 20 years after we moved out of them, there was actually a story that came around in which that the very same room we used to live in now has a reptile expert whom has a bunch of snakes in there. It's kind of crazy that the apartment even allows pets in there, let alone a bunch of snakes. Well, anyways, the very same day after we basically left the room, you know, the expert was pretty awesome, and he even got to let me hold a 10-foot long python. A blood python, to be exact. But when we left, 4 hours later, we ended up getting news that apparently one of the snakes broke out of their habitat and now was slithering around inside the building. Yeah. They didn't find him until 4 days later, though, because he was huddled up inside the ventilation system and was pretty deep in there, so they had to get somebody inside to rescue him. Save him from getting killed by the loads of gases that were being emitted from part of the vents. But they were actually what was helping keeping it warm. So that's why he stood there for a while. Just laid down and take a nap. Well, again, I've said a lot about this. But tomorrow, I feel like I'm going to be ending it all with one final piece worth talking about here. So, if you want to see more, go down to my channel. Make sure to like, subscribe, comment, follow me wherever you can find me, and stay on the Hollywood side.